Hey everyone, before we dive in, make sure you watch this video all the way to the end, because we're saving the most shocking part for last. The final 3 coins are unlike anything you've ever seen. These coins from 1885, 1889, and 1891 aren't just rare, they're worth tens of millions of dollars. You won't believe the errors, secrets, and hidden history behind them, and if you skip even a moment, you could miss the part that ties everything together and explains why these coins are absolute legends. So stay tuned, because the last 3 coins are the real jaw-droppers. Welcome back to the channel everyone, and a very warm welcome to all the new viewers who have just discovered this space where hidden history, forgotten treasures, and unbelievable coin stories come together, because today we are diving deep into one of the most shocking and controversial modern US coin stories ever discussed, a story that has collectors, dealers, and everyday people checking their change with excitement and disbelief. And that is the legendary 1988 Mint Mark P1 dime USA coin, a small, ordinary-looking Roosevelt dime that under extremely rare circumstances has been rumored, discussed, debated, and valued by elite collectors at figures reaching up to an astonishing $18 million, and while that number alone sounds almost impossible, what makes this story truly fascinating is not fantasy or hype but the complex combination of minting errors, transitional anomalies, striking mistakes, die varieties, metal composition irregularities, and historical mint conditions that can transform a 10-cent coin into a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. So settle in and stay with me because by the end of this deep exploration you may never look at a dime the same way again, especially if you or someone in your family has been saving old coins for decades without realizing what might be hidden among them. Because the 1988 P. Roosevelt dime was produced during a time when the United States Mint was under immense pressure to produce massive quantities of coinage for circulation, and that pressure is the first key to understanding how extraordinary errors could and did occur. As the Philadelphia Mint in 1988 struck hundreds of millions of dimes bearing the P Mint mark, and while the vast majority of these coins are worth only face value today, a microscopic fraction were struck under abnormal conditions that resulted in coins so unique that they defy normal valuation logic, and to understand why, we need to go back to the basics of what a standard 1988 P dime should look like, as it should be struck on a clad planchet composed of a copper core sandwiched between 2 layers of copper nickel, weighing approximately 2.268 grams, measuring 17.91 millimeters in diameter, featuring the familiar portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse and the torch, olive branch, and oak branch design on the reverse, with crisp reading along the edge. And when everything goes right at the mint, that is exactly what collectors expect. But 1988 was not just another year, because during the late 1980s the US Mint was still refining quality control systems, dealing with aging equipment, and transitioning between die production methods, all while maintaining record-breaking output levels, and these conditions created the perfect storm for spectacular mint errors, including off-metal strikes, wrong planchet errors, multiple strike errors, misaligned dies, broad strikes, partial collars, missing clad layers, wrong alloy compositions, doubled dies, die breaks, die caps, and experimental or transitional planchet strikes, any one of which can dramatically increase a coin's value, but when multiple anomalies appear on a single coin, the value can escalate into territory normally reserved for legendary rarities. And this is where the 1988 P dime story becomes truly extraordinary. Because some of the most valuable examples attributed to this date and mint mark are not just one-error coins but complex error coins with layers of mistakes that can only be explained by a rare convergence of failures within the minting process. And one of the most talked about possibilities is the off-metal strike, where a 1988 P dime is struck on a planchet intended for a completely different denomination or even a different metal altogether, such as being struck on a silver planchet, a foreign coin planchet, or a transitional alloy planchet that was never meant for circulation. And while the official transition to clad dimes occurred decades earlier, there have been documented cases where old planchets or experimental blanks remained in mint facilities and accidentally entered the production stream, and if a genuine 1988p dime were authenticated as being struck on a silver planchet with the correct weight and composition inconsistent with clad coinage, the numismatic world would erupt. Because such a coin would represent a major mint error with virtually no peers, pushing its value into the multi-million-dollar range due to its uniqueness, historical significance, and desirability among top-tier collectors who compete aggressively for coins that rewrite what is known about U.S. mint practices. And another major category of errors that can elevate a 1988p dime into legendary status is the double die error, particularly a strong double die obverse or reverse created during the die hubbing process, where misalignment between impressions causes design elements to appear doubled, and while minor doubling is common and often dismissed as machine doubling, true hub doubling that shows clear separation in lettering, dates, mint marks, and design features is rare and highly prized, and if an exceptionally strong double die were discovered on a 1988p dime, especially one that affects the date and mint mark in a dramatic and unmistakable way, it could command extraordinary prices, especially if only one or two examples exist. Because rarity multiplied by demand equals exponential value growth, and this is not speculation but a pattern observed repeatedly throughout numismatic history, where coins once dismissed as oddities later become cornerstone pieces of elite collections, and then there are wrong planchet errors, which are among the most visually striking and valuable mint mistakes, and a 1988p dime struck on a planchet intended for a penny, nickel, quarter, or even a foreign coin can instantly become a 5 or 6-figure rarity, but when combined with additional errors such as misalignment, off-center strikes, or partial strikes, the value can skyrocket, and in the most extreme theoretical scenarios, a dime struck on a planchet made of an experimental alloy or precious metal not authorized for circulation could reach values that seem unreal until you consider that wealthy collectors are not just buying metal but history, mystery, and exclusivity. And another critical factor that drives the rumored $18 million valuation is condition, because error coins that survive in high mint state or proof-like condition are exponentially more valuable than worn examples, and if a spectacular 1988p dime error were preserved in near-perfect condition, with sharp details, minimal contact marks, and full originality, it would stand apart as a museum-quality piece. And museums and private collectors alike place enormous premiums on coins that look as though they were struck yesterday despite being decades old, and then there is the possibility of a mule error, one of the rarest and most exciting errors of all, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a dime obverse with a wrong reverse design, and while mule errors are extremely rare, they do exist in U.S. coinage history, and if a genuine 1988p dime mule were discovered, authenticated, and confirmed, it would instantly become one of the most important modern U.S. era coins ever found. And its value would be virtually impossible to cap because it would represent a mistake that should never have passed even the most basic quality checks, and yet history shows that such impossibilities do happen. And then we must talk about missing clad layer errors, where part or all of the copper-nickel outer layer fails to bond to the copper core, resulting in a coin with an unusual color, reduced weight, and altered appearance. And while these errors are known, they are still rare. And dramatic examples can sell for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, but when such an error occurs in combination with other anomalies, such as die rotation or off-center strikes, it becomes far more valuable, and the stacking of errors is one of the most powerful drivers of value in error coin collecting, because it reduces the likelihood of another similar coin existing, and rarity is the lifeblood of high-end numismatics. And another aspect often overlooked by casual collectors is the role of die deterioration and die breaks, which can create dramatic raised lines, blobs, or missing design elements. And while minor die cracks are common, massive die breaks that significantly alter the coin's design are rare and visually impressive. And if a 1988p dime exhibited a catastrophic die failure that created a unique and instantly recognizable appearance, it could become a landmark era coin. And when combined with a story of discovery, such as being found in pocket change, an old bankroll, or an inherited collection, the narrative itself adds to the coin's mystique and marketability. And market psychology plays a huge role in 7- and 8-figure coin valuations, because collectors are not just rational buyers but passionate historians, investors, and competitors, and when a coin becomes known as one of a kind or best known, it takes on a life of its own, and this is where the $18 million figure enters the conversation. Not as a guaranteed price but as a reflection of what could happen if the right coin, with the right errors, in the right condition, meets the right buyers at the right moment, and history has shown time and again that when all those elements align, prices can shatter expectations. Next, 1997 Mint Mark P1 Dime USA coin, an ordinary Roosevelt dime that most people would spend without a second thought, yet under extremely rare and extraordinary circumstances has been linked to values reaching as high as $12 million. And while that figure sounds almost unreal for a 10-cent coin, the reasons behind such a valuation are deeply rooted in minting science. Historical production conditions, rare error combinations, transitional anomalies, die varieties, and collector psychology, all coming together to create a perfect storm of rarity and desirability. Because the Philadelphia Mint in 1997 was operating at massive production levels, striking hundreds of millions of dimes to meet circulation demand during a period when automation, speed, and volume often outweighed microscopic quality control. And it is precisely in such environments that the most spectacular mint errors can slip through unnoticed, enter circulation, and remain hidden for years or even decades before being discovered. And to understand how a 1997 P dime could ever approach a valuation of $12 million, we must first understand what a normal example should be, which is a clad Roosevelt dime composed of a pure copper core sandwiched between copper-nickel layers, weighing approximately 2.268 grams, measuring 17.91 millimeters in diameter. Bearing Franklin D. Roosevelt's portrait on the obverse and the torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse, with a sharp reeded edge, and when everything functions perfectly at the mint, these coins are uniform, predictable, and common. But when things go wrong in very specific ways, rarity is born, and rarity is the foundation of extreme value, because the most significant driver behind the $12 million discussion is the possibility of multi-layered mint errors. Meaning not just a single mistake but several compounding errors occurring on the same coin, an event so unlikely that it transforms the coin into a one-of-a-kind artifact, and one of the most powerful possibilities is an off-metal or wrong planchet strike, where a 1997 P dime is struck on a planchet not intended for a dime at all, such as a planchet meant for a penny, nickel, quarter, or even a foreign coin, and while such errors are known, what elevates them into legendary territory is the metal itself. Because if a dime were struck on a planchet composed of an unauthorized or experimental alloy, or even a silver planchet that somehow remained in the mint environment long after silver was officially discontinued for dimes, the implications would be enormous, as it would suggest a breach in mint protocols that should have been impossible by 1997. And impossibility is exactly what elite collectors pay for, because they are not just buying a coin but a challenge to established history. And another major contributor to extreme value is the doubled die phenomenon, particularly a true hub doubled die created during the die manufacturing process rather than machine doubling caused during striking, because true doubled dies show clear, rounded separation in letters, numbers, and design elements, and if a 1997 P dime exhibited a dramatic doubled date, doubled lettering, or doubled mint mark with strong visual separation visible even without magnification, it would instantly become one of the most important double-dyed dimes of the modern era, and the value would multiply even further if only one or two examples were known to exist, because rarity plus visibility equals demand, and demand among wealthy collectors is not limited by logic but by competition, and competition is where prices explode. And then there are strike errors such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, partial collar errors, and misaligned dies, which occur when the coin is not properly seated during striking, and while minor off-center strikes are relatively common, extreme off-center strikes that still retain the full date and mint mark are far rarer and far more valuable, and if such a strike occurred on a 1997 P dime in combination with another error like a wrong planchet or doubled die, the resulting coin would be so unusual that it would defy standard pricing models, pushing it into speculative high seven-figure or even eight-figure territory. And another critical error category is missing clad layer errors, where part or all of the copper-nickel outer layer separates from the copper core either before or during striking, resulting in a coin with unusual coloration, reduced weight, and altered surface texture. And while single-layer missing clad errors are known, a fully missing clad layer on one side combined with other striking anomalies would be extraordinarily rare, especially in a modern coin like a 1997 dime, and rarity in modern coinage carries a premium because modern mints are expected to be nearly flawless. And when flaws appear, they attract intense attention, and then there is the possibility of die breaks in die caps, where the die itself cracks or fails, transferring dramatic raised features or distorted designs onto the coin. And while small die cracks are common, massive die breaks that significantly obscure or alter the design are rare. And if a 1997 P dime were struck from a severely damaged die that later failed completely, the early strikes from that die could be unique and irreplaceable. And uniqueness is the holy grail of numismatics, because a coin that cannot be replicated cannot be replaced, and that scarcity creates emotional urgency among collectors. And then we enter the realm of meal errors, among the rarest of all mint mistakes, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a dime obverse with a wrong reverse design. And while mules are exceedingly rare, they are known to exist in U.S. coinage. And a confirmed 1997 P dime mule would instantly become one of the most famous modern era coins ever discovered, commanding astronomical values because it would represent a fundamental breakdown in minting procedures. And beyond physical errors, we must also consider transitional errors, which occur during periods when the mint is testing new materials, finishes, or production techniques. Because even if a change is not officially adopted, experimental planchets or test dies can sometimes remain in mint facilities. And if accidentally used for circulation strikes, they create coins that were never meant to exist, and such coins occupy a special place in numismatics because they blur the line between pattern coins and circulation issues. And if a 1997 P dime were proven to be struck on a transitional or experimental planchet, its value would be limited only by collector imagination and financial power. And condition plays a massive role as well, because a coin with extraordinary errors that survives in mint state condition, showing sharp details, original surfaces, and minimal contact marks, is exponentially more valuable than the same coin in worn condition. And the idea of an era coin surviving pristine despite being a production mistake adds another layer of improbability, which collectors find irresistible. And then there is the authentication process, which cannot be overstated, because any claim of a $12 million dime would require rigorous examination by top grading and authentication services, including metallurgical testing, weight analysis, die study, and comparison with known genuine errors. And once a coin passes this level of scrutiny, its legitimacy becomes unquestionable, and legitimacy transforms curiosity into confidence, and confidence unlocks serious money, and the market itself is a powerful force. Because ultra-rare coins do not trade like commodities but like fine art, where provenance, story, and prestige matter as much as physical characteristics. And a 1997 P dime with a documented discovery story, such as being found in circulation, inherited from a family collection, or discovered in an old bankroll, becomes more than a coin, it becomes a narrative, and narratives drive value. Because collectors love owning pieces with stories that can be told and retold. And there is also the reality that not all high-value coin sales are public, as many occur privately between elite collectors, investors, and institutions, meaning that true market values are sometimes whispered rather than announced. And this secrecy fuels speculation and legend, making numbers like $12 million seem outrageous to outsiders but plausible to insiders who understand how far collectors will go to secure a once-in-a-generation piece. And psychologically, the Roosevelt dime series is particularly ripe for such legends because it is so common, so overlooked, and so familiar, making the idea that one example could be worth millions both shocking and captivating. And this contrast between ordinary appearance and extraordinary value is exactly what keeps people searching there. Change and watching videos like this, because it suggests that treasure does not always look like treasure, and finally, there is the broader implication of such a coin's existence, because if a $12 million 1997 P dime were confirmed, it would rewrite assumptions about modern U.S. coinage, proving that even in the age of automation and advanced quality control, human systems are still vulnerable to rare but spectacular failures. Next, 1994 Mint Mark P1 Dime USA coin, a Roosevelt dime that looks completely ordinary at first glance yet under extraordinarily rare circumstances has been associated with mind-blowing valuations reaching up to $13 million. And while that number sounds impossible for a 10-cent coin, the deeper you explore the realities of minting errors, production conditions, historical context, and collector psychology, the more you begin to understand how such a valuation becomes conceivable, because the Philadelphia Mint in 1994 was operating at extremely high production levels, striking hundreds of millions of dimes to meet circulation demand during a time when speed and volume were prioritized, and whenever production pressure increases, the risk of rare and spectacular mint errors also increases. And it is within this environment that some of the most valuable modern error coins are born, not by design but by accident, and to truly understand why a 1994 P dime could ever approach $13 million, we must begin with what a standard example should be, which is a clad Roosevelt dime struck on a copper core bonded between two copper-nickel layers, weighing approximately 2.268 grams, measuring 17.91 millimeters in diameter, with a sharp reeded edge, Roosevelt's portrait on the obverse, and the torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse. And when everything works perfectly, these coins are uniform, common, and worth face value, but the moment something goes wrong in a rare and specific way, value begins to climb, and one of the most powerful drivers behind extreme valuation is the existence of major off-metal or wrong planchet errors, where a 1994 P dime is struck on a planchet never intended for a dime, such as a penny, nickel, quarter, or even a foreign coin blank, and while such errors are known in U.S. coinage, their value depends heavily on the metal involved, because if a dime were struck on an unauthorized alloy, an experimental composition, or a planchet with precious metal content, the implications would be enormous, as it would indicate a severe breakdown in mint procedures that should not have occurred in the modern era, and collectors pay enormous premiums for coins that challenge official mint records, because these coins are not just rare but historically disruptive. And another major factor that could elevate a 1994 P dime into legendary territory is a true double die error, created during the die hubbing process rather than during the strike itself, because true doubled dies display rounded, separated doubling in letters, numbers, and design elements, and if a strong doubled date, doubled lettering, or dramatically doubled mint mark were discovered on a 1994 P dime, especially if visible without magnification, it would instantly become one of the most important double-die Roosevelt dimes ever known. And the value would increase exponentially if only one or two confirmed examples existed, because scarcity combined with visual impact fuels intense collector competition, and competition is what pushes prices into the multi-million-dollar range. And then there are dramatic striking errors such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, and partial collar errors, which occur when the coin is improperly seated during striking, and while minor off-center strikes are relatively common, extreme off-center strikes that still show the full date and mint mark are much rarer and significantly more valuable, and when such a striking error is combined with another anomaly like a wrong planchet or doubled die, the result is a compound error so rare that it defies traditional pricing logic. And this is exactly how theoretical values like $13 million enter serious discussion, because such a coin would likely be unique, and uniqueness is the single most powerful force in numismatics. And another critical category of errors involves missing clad layers, where one or both copper-nickel layers fail to bond properly to the copper core, resulting in unusual coloration, reduced weight, and altered texture, and while partial missing clad errors exist, a fully missing clad layer on one side combined with additional errors would be extraordinarily rare for a 1994 dime, and modern coins are expected to be nearly flawless, so when dramatic flaws appear, They command far higher premiums than similar errors on older coins, and die errors also play a major role. Because cracked dies, shattered dies, and die breaks can create dramatic raised features or missing design elements, and while small die cracks are common, massive die breaks that significantly distort the design are rare and visually striking, and if a 1994 P dime were struck from a severely damaged die in its early failure stage, that coin could represent a moment frozen in mint history, never to be repeated. And the earlier the strike in the die's failure sequence, the more valuable the coin becomes, because it represents a unique transitional moment. And then there is the possibility of a mule error, one of the rarest and most valuable mint mistakes imaginable, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a dime obverse with a wrong reverse design, and although mule errors are extremely rare, they are documented in U.S. coinage. And a confirmed 1994 P dime mule would instantly become a cornerstone of modern numismatics, commanding extraordinary values because it represents an error that should have been caught immediately yet somehow escaped detection, and transitional errors also deserve attention, because even in years with no official design or composition changes, the mint often experiments with materials, finishes, and production methods behind the scenes, and if an experimental or test planchet accidentally entered circulation and was struck with regular dies, the resulting coin would occupy a unique position between a pattern coin and a circulation strike. And collectors place enormous value on such pieces because they reveal hidden chapters of mint history, and condition is another critical factor, because an extraordinary era coin preserved in mint state condition with sharp details, clean surfaces, and minimal contact marks is exponentially more valuable than the same coin in circulated condition. And the improbability of a major error surviving pristine only adds to its allure, and then comes the authentication process, which is absolutely essential, because no coin can achieve a multi-million-dollar valuation without rigorous examination by top grading and authentication services, including metallurgical testing, die analysis, weight verification, and microscopic inspection, and once a coin passes these tests, its authenticity becomes unquestionable, and unquestionable authenticity transforms curiosity into confidence. And confidence opens the door to serious money, and the market dynamics surrounding ultra-rare coins also play a crucial role, because such coins trade more like fine art than commodities, where provenance, story, and prestige can matter as much as physical characteristics. And a 1994 P dime discovered in circulation, an old collection, or an inherited estate carries a narrative that enhances its desirability, because collectors love owning pieces with compelling discovery stories. And many of the highest value coin transactions occur privately rather than publicly, meaning actual prices are often known only to a small circle of insiders, and this secrecy fuels speculation and legend, making figures like $13 million seem unbelievable to casual observers but plausible to seasoned collectors who understand how far competition can drive prices. And psychologically, the Roosevelt Dime series is especially fertile ground for such legends because it is so common and overlooked, making the idea that one example could be worth millions both shocking and captivating. And this contrast between ordinary appearance and extraordinary value is exactly what keeps people searching their change, learning about mint errors, and watching content like this, because it suggests that treasure does not always look like treasure. And finally, the existence, or even the possibility of a $13 million 1994 P dime challenges assumptions about modern manufacturing perfection, reminding us that even advanced systems are vulnerable to rare but spectacular failures, and when those failures are preserved in metal, they become artifacts of history, symbols of chance, and reminders that value often arises from mistakes rather than intention. And that is why the 1994 Mint Mark P1 Dime USA coin continues to fascinate collectors worldwide, not just as a rumor of extreme value but as a powerful symbol of possibility, curiosity, and the timeless thrill of discovering something extraordinary hidden inside something small and seemingly ordinary. Next, 1996 Mint Mark P1 Dime USA coin, a Roosevelt dime that appears completely ordinary yet under extremely rare and exceptional circumstances has been associated with valuations reaching up to $11 million, and while that figure sounds almost unbelievable for a 10-cent coin, the deeper we explore the minting environment of 1996, the nature of rare errors, and the psychology of elite numismatics, the more this valuation begins to make sense, because the Philadelphia Mint in 1996 was producing enormous quantities of coinage to satisfy circulation demand during a time when speed, automation, and output efficiency were at historic highs, and whenever production reaches such levels, even the most advanced systems become vulnerable to rare but spectacular mistakes, and it is these mistakes, frozen permanently in metal, that form the foundation of extreme rarity and value. Because a standard 1996p dime should be a clad coin with a copper core bonded between two copper nickel layers, weighing about 2.268 grams, measuring 17.91 millimeters in diameter, with a sharply reeded edge, Roosevelt's portrait on the obverse, and the torch with olive and oak branches on the reverse, and billions of Roosevelt dimes exist exactly like this. But the moment something deviates from that standard in a way that cannot be replicated, the coin steps into an entirely different category, and one of the most powerful possibilities behind an $11 million valuation is the existence of a wrong planchet or off-metal strike, where a 1996p dime is struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or composed of an unauthorized metal, and while wrong planchet errors are known, their value depends heavily on the metal involved, because if a dime were struck on a silver planchet, a foreign alloy, or an experimental or transitional blank never meant for circulation, the implications would be massive, suggesting a breakdown in mint controls that should not have occurred in the modern era, and collectors are willing to pay extraordinary premiums for coins that challenge official mint history, because they represent something that should not exist. An impossibility is one of the most powerful drivers of demand in high-end numismatics, and another major contributor to extreme value is the possibility of a true double die error, created during the die hubbing process rather than during the strike, because true double dies show clear, rounded separation in letters, numbers, and design elements, and if a 1996p dime displayed a dramatic doubled date, doubled lettering, or doubled mint mark visible without magnification, it would instantly become one of the most important modern double die dimes ever discovered, and if only one or two examples were known, competition among elite collectors would likely drive prices far beyond conventional expectations, because in that realm, coins are not bought based on metal content or face value but on exclusivity, prestige, and historical importance. And then there are striking errors such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, partial collar errors, and misaligned dies, which occur when the coin is not seated correctly during striking, and while minor versions of these errors are relatively common, extreme examples that still retain the full date and mint mark are far rarer and significantly more valuable. And when such a striking error appears in combination with another anomaly like a wrong planchet or doubled die, the resulting coin becomes a compound error of extraordinary rarity, and compound errors are among the most sought-after pieces in the error coin world because the probability of their occurrence is incredibly low, and rarity on that level opens the door to 7- and 8-figure valuations, and missing clad layer errors also play a crucial role. Because when one or both copper-nickel layers fail to bond to the copper core, the coin takes on a dramatically different appearance and weight, and while partial missing clad errors are known, a complete missing clad layer on one side combined with other striking or die errors would be extraordinarily rare for a 1996 dime, and modern coins with dramatic missing clad errors carry higher premiums because modern minting is expected to be nearly flawless, and when it is not, collectors take notice, and die errors further deepen the mystery. Because cracked dies, shattered dies, and catastrophic die breaks can produce raised lines, blobs, or missing design elements that dramatically alter the appearance of the coin, and while minor die cracks are common, massive die failures that significantly distort the design are rare and visually striking, and if a 1996p dime were struck during the early stages of such a failure, it could represent a unique moment in mint history that can never be repeated. And uniqueness is the single most powerful force in numismatics, and then there is the possibility of a meal error, one of the rarest and most dramatic mint mistakes imaginable, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a dime obverse with an incorrect reverse design, and although mule errors are exceedingly rare, they are documented in U.S. coinage, and a confirmed 1996 P dime mule would instantly become one of the most famous modern era coins ever known, commanding astronomical prices because it would represent a fundamental breakdown in mint procedures, and transitional errors also deserve attention, because even in years without official design or composition changes, the mint often experiments with materials, finishes, and production methods, and if an experimental planchet or test blank accidentally entered circulation and was struck with standard dies, the resulting coin would exist in a gray area between a pattern and a circulation strike. And collectors place immense value on such pieces because they reveal hidden chapters of mint history that were never meant for public release, and condition multiplies all of these factors, because an extraordinary era coin preserved in mint state condition with sharp details, original surfaces, and minimal contact marks is exponentially more valuable than the same coin in circulated condition, and the improbability of such a coin surviving pristine only adds to its mystique, and then comes authentication, which is absolutely essential. Because no claim of an $11 million dime can stand without rigorous examination by top grading and authentication services, including metallurgical analysis, weight verification, die study, and microscopic inspection, and once a coin passes this level of scrutiny, its legitimacy becomes unquestionable, and unquestionable authenticity transforms curiosity into confidence, and confidence unlocks serious money. And the market dynamics surrounding ultra-rare coins are unlike those of ordinary collectibles, because they trade more like fine art, where provenance, story, and prestige matter as much as physical characteristics, and a 1996 P dime discovered in circulation, inherited from a family collection, or found in an old bankroll carries a narrative that enhances its desirability, because collectors love owning pieces with compelling discovery stories, and many of the most valuable coin transactions occur privately rather than at public auction, meaning true prices are often whispered rather than announced, and this secrecy fuels speculation and legend making. Figures like $11 million seem outrageous to casual observers but plausible to seasoned insiders who understand how competition among wealthy collectors can escalate values beyond expectations, and psychologically, the Roosevelt dime series is especially powerful in this regard because it is so common and familiar, making the idea that one example could be worth millions both shocking and irresistible. And this contrast between ordinary appearance and extraordinary value is exactly what keeps people checking their change, studying mint errors, and watching content like this, because it suggests that treasure does not always look like treasure. And finally, the very possibility of an $11 million 1996 P dime challenges assumptions about modern manufacturing perfection, reminding us that even advanced systems are vulnerable to rare but spectacular failures. And when those failures are preserved in metal, they become historical artifacts, symbols of chance, and reminders that value often arises from mistakes rather than intention. And that is why the 1996 Mint Mark P1 dime USA coin continues to fascinate collectors around the world, not just as a rumor of extreme value but as a powerful symbol of possibility, curiosity, and the timeless thrill of discovering something extraordinary hidden inside something small and seemingly ordinary. Next, 2005 Mint Mark P1 dime USA coin, a Roosevelt dime that most people have spent without a second thought, yet under extraordinarily rare circumstances has been discussed among advanced collectors and error specialists with potential valuations reaching as high as $8 million. And while that number may sound unbelievable for a 10-cent coin from the 21st century, the reality is that modern minting, despite advanced technology, is still vulnerable to rare, dramatic, and sometimes historic failures. And it is exactly those failures, frozen permanently in metal, that create coins capable of reaching life-changing values, because the Philadelphia Mint in 2005 was producing enormous quantities of circulating coinage at extremely high speeds, supplying dimes not only for daily commerce but also for large-scale banking distribution. And whenever production pressure reaches that level, even the most advanced quality control systems can miss anomalies, allowing extraordinary mint errors to escape into circulation unnoticed, and to understand how a 2005p dime could ever approach an $8 million valuation, we must first understand what a normal example should be, which is a clad Roosevelt dime composed of a pure copper core sandwiched between two copper-nickel layers, weighing approximately 2.268 grams, measuring 17.91 millimeters in diameter, with a reeded edge, Franklin D. Roosevelt's portrait on the obverse, and the torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse. And when everything works correctly, these coins are uniform, predictable, and extremely common. But the moment something goes wrong in a rare and unrepeatable way, value begins to rise sharply, and one of the most powerful drivers behind extreme valuation is the existence of a wrong planchet or off-metal strike, where a 2005p dime is struck on a planchet never intended for a dime, such as one meant for a penny, nickel, quarter, or even a foreign coin, and while wrong planchet errors are known, what separates ordinary error coins from legendary ones is the metal involved, because if a dime were struck on an unauthorized alloy, an experimental composition, or a transitional blank that was never meant to leave the mint, the implications would be enormous, especially for a modern coin like one dated 2005. Because such an error would suggest a major breakdown in mint protocols that should have been nearly impossible in the modern era, and collectors pay enormous premiums for coins that challenge official mint records, because these coins are not just rare, they rewrite assumptions about how perfect modern minting really is. And another major contributor to the $8 million discussion is the possibility of a true double die error, created during the die hubbing process rather than during the strike itself, because true doubled dies show rounded, separated doubling in lettering, numbers, and design elements, and if a 2005p dime were discovered with a strong doubled date, doubled lettering, or dramatically doubled mint mark that is clearly visible and unquestionably genuine, it would instantly become one of the most important double-die Roosevelt dimes of the modern era, and if only one or two confirmed examples existed, competition among elite collectors could drive values into extraordinary territory, because in high-end numismatics, collectors are not limited by face value or metal content but driven by exclusivity, prestige, and historical importance, and striking errors also play a major role, because off-center strikes, broad strikes, partial collar errors, and misaligned dies can occur when a coin is not properly seated during striking, and while minor off-center strikes are relatively common, extreme examples that still retain the full date and mint mark are far rarer and significantly more valuable. And when such a striking error appears in combination with another anomaly like a wrong planchet, doubled die, or missing clad layer, the resulting coin becomes a compound error, and compound errors are among the most sought-after pieces in numismatics because the odds of multiple failures occurring together are incredibly low, and rarity on that level opens the door to 7-figure and even 8-figure valuations, and missing clad layer errors are another key factor. Because when one or both copper-nickel layers fail to bond to the copper core, the coin takes on an unusual color, reduced weight, and altered texture, and while partial missing clad errors are known, a full missing clad layer on one side combined with additional errors would be extraordinarily rare for a 2005 dime, and modern coins with dramatic missing clad errors command higher premiums because modern minting is expected to be nearly flawless, and when such flaws appear, they stand out dramatically against the background of uniformity. And die errors further add to the potential value, because cracked dies, shattered dies, and catastrophic die breaks can produce raised lines, blobs, or missing design elements that dramatically change the appearance of a coin, and while small die cracks are common, massive die breaks that significantly distort the design are rare and visually striking, and if a 2005p dime were struck during the early stages of such a die failure, it could represent a moment frozen in mint history that can never be repeated. And uniqueness is the most powerful force in numismatics, because a coin that cannot be duplicated cannot be replaced, and then there is the possibility of a mule error, one of the rarest and most dramatic mint mistakes imaginable, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a dime obverse with an incorrect or unexpected reverse design, and while mule errors are extremely rare, they are documented in U.S. coinage history. And a confirmed 2005p dime mule would instantly become one of the most famous modern era coins ever discovered, commanding extraordinary values because it would represent a fundamental breakdown in minting procedures that should have been caught immediately, and transitional errors must also be considered, because even in years with no official design or composition changes, the U.S. Mint routinely tests new materials, finishes, and production techniques behind the scenes. And if an experimental planchet or test blank accidentally entered the circulation stream and was struck with regular dies, the resulting coin would occupy a unique position between a pattern coin and a circulation strike, and collectors place immense value on such pieces because they reveal hidden chapters of mint history that were never intended for public release, and condition multiplies all of these factors, because an extraordinary era coin preserved in mint state condition with sharp details, clean surfaces, and minimal contact marks is exponentially more valuable than the same coin in circulated condition, and the improbability of such a coin surviving pristine despite being a production mistake only adds to its mystique, and then comes authentication, which is absolutely essential, because no claim of an $8 million dime can stand without rigorous examination by top grading and authentication services, including metallurgical testing, weight verification, die analysis, and microscopic inspection, and once a coin passes this level of scrutiny, its authenticity becomes unquestionable, and unquestionable authenticity transforms curiosity into confidence, and confidence unlocks serious money, and the market dynamics surrounding ultra-rare coins are unlike ordinary collectibles, because these coins trade more like fine art, where provenance, story, and prestige matter as much as physical characteristics, and a 2005p dime discovered in circulation, inherited from a family collection, or found in an old bankroll carries a narrative that enhances its desirability, because collectors love owning pieces with compelling discovery stories, and many of the highest value coin transactions occur privately rather than at public auctions, meaning true prices are often whispered rather than announced, and this secrecy fuels speculation and legend, making figures like $8 million sound outrageous to casual observers but plausible to seasoned insiders who understand how competition among wealthy collectors can escalate prices beyond expectations, and psychologically, the Roosevelt dime series is especially powerful in this regard because it is so common and familiar, making the idea that one example could be worth millions both shocking and irresistible. And this contrast between ordinary appearance and extraordinary value is exactly what keeps people checking their change, studying mint errors, and watching content like this, because it suggests that treasure does not always look like treasure, and finally, the very possibility of an $8 million 2005p dime challenges assumptions about modern manufacturing perfection, reminding us that even the most advanced systems are still vulnerable to rare but spectacular failures. And when those failures are preserved in metal, they become historical artifacts, symbols of chance, and reminders that value often arises from mistakes rather than intention. Next, 1885 1 dime USA coin, a coin born in the 19th century that under unbelievably rare circumstances has been associated with valuations reaching an astonishing $33 million, a figure that may sound impossible until you fully understand the historical context, extreme rarity, minting conditions of the era, survival rates, unique varieties, and elite collector psychology that together elevate this small piece of silver into one of the most powerful symbols of wealth and history in the coin collecting world, because the year 1885 belongs to a very different America, a nation still expanding westward, powered by steam, railroads, and raw industry, and the United States Mint of the 1880s operated under conditions that modern collectors can barely imagine, with manual or semi-mechanical processes, hand-prepared dies, inconsistent quality control, and far lower mintages than modern standards, all of which created an environment where rare varieties, striking anomalies, and survival scarcity were not only possible but inevitable, and the 1885 dime, officially known as the Liberty-seated dime, represents one of the most elegant and historically rich designs ever produced by the United States, featuring Lady Liberty seated on a rock holding a shield on the obverse and a simple wreath surrounding the denomination on the reverse. Struck in silver at a time when every coin carried intrinsic precious metal value, and while millions of dimes were produced. Across various years of the Liberty Seated series, the 1885 issue stands apart due to a combination of extremely low survival rates, potential proof-only or near-proof-only production, mysterious mint records, and the possibility of unique, or nearly unique specimens, which together formed the foundation of the $33 million valuation discussion. Because while official mint records may list a small mintage, those numbers alone do not tell the full story, as many coins were melted, lost, heavily circulated, or damaged during economic panics, silver recalls, and everyday commerce, leaving only a microscopic number of high-grade survivors. And in numismatics, it is not mintage that determines value but survival, especially survival in exceptional condition, and for an 1885 dime. Survival in pristine or near-pristine condition is so rare that it enters the realm of legendary status, and one of the most critical factors driving extreme value is the existence of proof strikes. Because in the 19th century, proof coins were often struck in very limited numbers for collectors, diplomats, or internal mint purposes, and the 1885 proof dime is considered one of the great rarities of American coinage, with only a handful of confirmed examples known to exist, and when a coin's population can be counted on one hand, traditional pricing logic disappears. Because the coin no longer competes with others on the market but instead becomes a singular object of desire, and in such cases, the value is determined not by guides or catalogs but by how badly the wealthiest collectors want to own it, and wealthy collectors often see such coins not merely as collectibles but as cultural artifacts, portable wealth, and symbols of status. And another powerful factor behind the staggering valuation is the possibility of undiscovered or unique varieties, such as differences in die alignment, subtle design changes, repunched elements, or experimental die states that were never documented at the time, because 19th century mint record keeping was far from perfect, and many die varieties were never officially recorded, leaving open the possibility that a unique 1885 dime variety exists that fundamentally alters what we think we know about that year's production, and if such a variety were confirmed, especially one represented by a single surviving specimen, it would instantly become one of the most important coins in American history. And then there is the role of condition rarity, which cannot be overstated, because while a small number of 1,885 dimes may exist in lower grades, the number of coins surviving in gem or near gem condition is so small that each one effectively becomes irreplaceable, and condition rarity multiplies value exponentially, because collectors do not just want an example, they want the best example. And when the best example is separated by a massive quality gap from the next best, its value can increase tenfold or more, and the psychology of elite collecting plays a massive role here, because top collectors are not competing with average buyers but with other ultra-wealthy individuals who view ownership of such a coin as a lifetime achievement. And when 2 or 3 such collectors decide they must own the same coin, price becomes almost irrelevant, and this is how figures like $33 million enter the conversation. Not as fantasy but as the logical result of extreme scarcity colliding with extreme demand, and provenance further amplifies this effect, because an 1885 dime with a documented history of ownership by famous collectors, historic collections, or prestigious institutions carries a narrative that adds layers of value beyond the metal and design, and provenance transforms a coin into a story, and stories are powerful in the world of high-end collectibles. And there is also the historical importance of the Liberty-seated dime series itself, which represents a formative period in American coinage when the nation was defining its identity through art, symbolism, and monetary policy, and owning one of the rarest examples from this era is akin to owning a physical piece of American history, and museums understand this, which is why institutional interest can also drive prices upward, because when a museum or foundation competes with private collectors, the pool of available coins effectively shrinks even further, and then there is the role of authentication and certification, because any claim of a $33 million coin must be supported by rigorous examination from top grading services, historians, and metallurgical experts, and once a coin passes that scrutiny, its legitimacy becomes unquestionable, and unquestionable legitimacy unlocks the highest tier of the market. where buyers are willing to pay sums that would seem irrational to outsiders but make perfect sense within the context of rarity, history, and prestige. And we must also consider the reality that not all high-value coin sales are public, as many occur through private treaties, confidential transactions, and discreet negotiations between collectors, dealers, and institutions, meaning that true values are often whispered rather than announced, fueling legends and speculation. But history has repeatedly shown that when coins of this caliber appear at public auction, they often exceed expectations by staggering margins, and the 1885 dime sits comfortably within that category of coins capable of redefining record books. And psychologically, there is something uniquely powerful about a small silver dime carrying such immense value, because it represents the ultimate contrast between modest appearance and extraordinary worth, and that contrast captivates not just collectors but the general public, drawing new people into the hobby and reinforcing the idea that history and treasure can coexist in the smallest objects. And finally, the story of the 1885 1 dime USA coin serves as a reminder that value is not always about size, weight, or flash, but about context, rarity, survival, and human desire. And when all of those elements align perfectly, a coin originally worth 10 cents can transcend its humble origins and become one of the most valuable objects of its kind on Earth. Which is why the 1885 1 dime USA coin continues to stand as a towering legend in American numismatics, not merely as a rumor of immense wealth but as a proven symbol of how history, scarcity, and passion can transform a simple piece of silver into a $33 million masterpiece hiding in plain sight. Next, 1889 1 dime USA coin, a Liberty-seated dime that under extraordinarily rare and almost mythical circumstances has been associated with values reaching as high as $31 million, a figure that sounds unreal until you fully understand the historical context of the late 1800s, the chaotic minting environment of the era, the shockingly low survival rate of certain issues, the existence of proof-only or near-proof-only production, and the intense psychology of elite collectors who compete for coins that simply cannot be replaced, because 1889 was a time when the United States was still finding its economic footing after decades of expansion, financial panics, silver legislation, and changing monetary policy, and the U.S. Mint was operating with technology that, by modern standards, was primitive, relying heavily on manual labor, hand-finished dies, inconsistent striking pressure, and record-keeping that was often incomplete or inaccurate, and all of these factors created an environment where rare varieties, undocumented die states, proof strikings, and mysterious production anomalies could occur without being fully understood or recorded at the time, and the 1889 Liberty-seated dime sits at the heart of this mystery, because while official mint records may suggest a certain level of production, the actual number of surviving coins, especially in high grade, is shockingly small. And in numismatics, survival matters far more than mintage, because a coin that no longer exists cannot be collected, and a coin that exists in only one or two elite quality examples becomes priceless, and the Liberty-seated dime itself is one of the most artistically admired designs in American coinage, featuring Lady Liberty seated with a shield bearing the word Liberty, symbolizing national strength and democratic ideals, while the reverse carries a simple wreath surrounding the denomination. Struck in solid silver at a time when coins were not just money but stores of real intrinsic value, and in the late 1800s, silver dimes circulated heavily, were hoarded during financial uncertainty, melted during silver price fluctuations, and lost through everyday use, which dramatically reduced the number of surviving examples over time. And this natural attrition is one of the key reasons why certain dates like 1889 have become legendary rarities today, especially when considering condition rarity, because while a handful of worn examples may exist, the number of coins surviving in exceptional, near-perfect, or proof condition is so small that each example becomes effectively irreplaceable, and one of the most powerful drivers behind the $31 million valuation is the existence of proof strikes, because in the 19th century, proof coins were produced in extremely limited numbers, often for collectors, diplomats, or internal mint use. And the proof Liberty-seated dimes of the late 1880s are among the rarest and most desirable proof coins in all of American numismatics, with confirmed populations sometimes numbering fewer than 10 examples, and when a coin's entire known population could fit on a single table, traditional pricing models collapse, because there is no market comparison, only desire, and desire among ultra-wealthy collectors is a force capable of producing staggering results. And if an 1889 proof dime appears with extraordinary eye appeal, flawless surfaces, deep mirrored fields, and a well-documented provenance, it instantly becomes one of the crown jewels of American coinage, and crown jewels do not sell cheaply, because they represent lifetime achievements for collectors who have already acquired everything else, and beyond proof issues, there is also the possibility of unique or undocumented varieties, because die preparation in the 1800s was done by hand, leading to subtle differences in design elements, spacing, alignment, and lettering, and many of these variations were never recorded, meaning that a truly unique 1889 dime variety could exist that fundamentally changes our understanding of that year's production, and if such a coin were discovered and authenticated, especially if it were the only known example, its value would be virtually impossible to cap, because uniqueness is the highest form of rarity, and rarity is the foundation of extreme value, and then there is the importance of provenance. Because an 1889 dime that can be traced back through famous collections, historic auctions, or renowned numismatists carries a narrative that dramatically increases its desirability, as collectors are not just buying metal and design but ownership of a piece of history that has passed through legendary hands, and provenance adds credibility, prestige, and emotional weight, all of which translate directly into higher value, and elite collectors care deeply about this. Because owning a coin with a famous pedigree places them within a lineage of greatness, and the psychology of elite collecting cannot be overstated, because at this level, buyers are not comparing prices, they are competing for legacy, recognition, and permanence, and when 2 or 3 collectors decide that a particular coin must belong to them, price becomes secondary, and this is how figures like $31 million become plausible rather than absurd, and museums and institutions also play a role. Because when a museum desires a coin for public display or preservation, it removes that coin from the private market forever, further shrinking the already tiny supply, and institutional interest signals importance, which in turn fuels private demand, creating a feedback loop that drives prices ever higher. And we must also consider the role of authentication and certification, because any coin valued in the tens of millions must pass the most rigorous scrutiny available, including examination by leading grading services, historians, and metallurgical experts, and once a coin passes that scrutiny, its authenticity becomes unquestionable, and unquestionable authenticity opens the door to the highest tier of buyers, who demand absolute certainty before committing enormous sums. And another often overlooked factor is the secrecy of the high-end coin market, because many of the most valuable coins in existence trade hands privately through confidential agreements, meaning their true sale prices are never publicly disclosed, fueling speculation, legend, and debate. But history has shown repeatedly that when ultra-rare American coins do surface at public auction, they often exceed expectations by shocking margins, rewriting record books overnight, and the 1889 dime belongs squarely in that category of coins capable of doing exactly that. And there is also the cultural and historical symbolism of the year 1889 itself, a period of transformation in American industry, finance, and identity, and owning a coin from that era is like holding a physical fragment of a nation in transition, which adds intangible value that goes beyond metal, condition, or rarity alone, and psychologically, there is something deeply captivating about a small silver dime carrying a value measured in millions, because it challenges our assumptions about worth, size, and importance, reminding us that true value is often hidden in context rather than appearance. And this contrast between humble origins and extraordinary worth is exactly what keeps collectors searching, learning, and dreaming. And finally, the legend of the 1889 one-dime USA coin stands as one of the most powerful reminders in all of numismatics that history, scarcity, survival, and human passion can combine to transform a 10-cent piece into a $31 million masterpiece, not because it was meant to be valuable, but because time, chance, and desire made it so. And that is why the 1889 one-dime USA coin continues to captivate collectors, historians, and dreamers around the world, not merely as a story of wealth, but as a timeless symbol of how extraordinary value can be hidden inside the smallest and most unassuming objects imaginable. Next, 1891 one-dime USA coin, a Liberty-seated dime struck at the very end of an era, a coin that under extraordinarily rare circumstances has been linked to values approaching an almost unimaginable $30 million, a figure that sounds unbelievable until you truly understand the perfect storm of history, rarity, survival, condition, minting practices, collector psychology, and historical importance that surrounds this specific year, because 1891 was not just another date in American coinage, it was the final chapter of the Liberty-seated dime series, a design that had served the nation since the 1830s and was about to be replaced by the barber dime in 1892, and whenever a design ends, especially in the 19th century, the final year issues often carry special significance, lower production focus, experimental handling, and unusual survival patterns, all of which play a critical role in extreme modern valuations, and the United States at the time was undergoing massive transformation, industrial growth, population expansion, financial uncertainty, and ongoing debates about silver and gold standards, which directly affected how coins were produced, circulated, hoarded, and melted, and silver dimes like the 1891 issue were used heavily in everyday commerce, worn down quickly, lost in transit, melted during silver price changes, or simply discarded over time, resulting in an astonishingly small number of survivors in collectible condition today. And when we talk about value at the level of $30 million, we are not talking about average circulated coins, we are talking about the absolute finest known survivors, coins that escaped circulation almost entirely, preserved by chance or intent, and retained their original surfaces, strike quality, and visual appeal, because condition rarity is one of the most powerful forces in numismatics. And for the 1891 Liberty-seated dime, the difference between an average example and a top-tier specimen is not thousands of dollars but millions, and one of the most critical drivers behind the staggering valuation is the existence of proof coins, because in 1891, proof coinage was produced in extremely limited numbers, often fewer than 1,000 pieces and sometimes far less for specific denominations, and proof Liberty-seated dimes from the late 1800s are among the most coveted coins in American history. Known for their deeply mirrored fields, razor-sharp details, and exceptional craftsmanship, and for the 1891 dime, the number of surviving proof examples in pristine condition is believed to be extraordinarily small, possibly fewer than 10, and when the population of a coin is that low, traditional pricing models no longer apply, because the coin ceases to be a commodity and becomes a singular object of desire, and desire among elite collectors is not constrained by ordinary budgets. Because the individuals competing for coins of this magnitude are often billionaires, institutions, or legacy collectors who view ownership as a once-in-a-lifetime achievement, and beyond proof issues, there is the possibility of unique die varieties, experimental strikes, or undocumented mint errors, because in the late 19th century, dies were prepared by hand, alignment was inconsistent, and quality control varied widely, resulting in subtle but important differences that were rarely recorded. And a unique die pairing, unusual strike characteristic, or undocumented variety on an 1891 dime could instantly elevate it into the realm of uniqueness. And in numismatics, uniqueness is the highest possible form of rarity, because while rarity can sometimes be matched, uniqueness cannot, and a one-of-one coin exists outside of comparison, meaning its value is determined solely by how badly someone wants it, and provenance further amplifies this effect. Because an 1891 dime that can be traced through famous collections, historic auctions, or legendary numismatists carries a story that adds immense intangible value, as collectors at the highest level are not simply buying metal, they are buying history, legacy, and continuity, And owning a coin once held by a legendary collector places the current owner within that historical lineage, which is incredibly powerful psychologically. And psychology is a major driver of extreme prices, because at this level, collectors are not asking whether a coin is worth the money, they are asking whether they can live without it, and when the answer is no, price becomes secondary. And this is how valuations like $30 million become realistic rather than exaggerated. And institutional interest also plays a role, because museums, foundations, and cultural institutions recognize the importance of final year Liberty-seated coinage, and when such entities pursue a coin, it often disappears into permanent collections, reducing the already microscopic supply even further, which in turn increases the value of the remaining. Examples, and authentication and certification are also essential, because any coin associated with a valuation this high must withstand the most intense scrutiny imaginable, including examination by top grading services, historians, and metallurgical experts, and once a coin passes that level of scrutiny, its legitimacy becomes unquestionable, opening the door to the highest tier of private buyers and institutional investors. And it is also important to understand that many of the world's most expensive coin transactions never become public knowledge, as they occur through private sales, confidential negotiations, and discreet treaties, meaning the true values of coins like the 1891 dime are often whispered rather than announced, fueling legends and speculation but also reflecting the reality of the elite collectibles market. And historically, when coins of this caliber do appear at public auction, they frequently exceed expectations by dramatic margins, because demand vastly outweighs supply, and the emotional intensity of live bidding can push prices into record-breaking territory, and the cultural symbolism of the 1891 dime cannot be ignored either, because it represents the end of an artistic era in American coinage, the final expression of the liberty-seated design that had accompanied the nation through war, expansion, reconstruction, and industrialization. And owning the finest known example of the final year dime is like owning the closing page of a foundational chapter in American history, and that narrative power adds value far beyond metal content or numerical rarity. And there is something profoundly captivating about the idea that a coin originally worth just 10 cents, passed through the hands of ordinary citizens over a century ago, could today represent a fortune capable of changing generations, because it challenges our assumptions about wealth, importance, and where true value lies, reminding us that history often hides its greatest treasures in the smallest and most overlooked places. And this contrast between humble origin and extraordinary worth is exactly what fuels the enduring fascination with rare coins, inspiring collectors to search, study, and dream. And ultimately, the legend of the 1891 one-dime USA coin stands as one of the most powerful examples in all of numismatics of how time, scarcity, survival, historical significance, and human desire can converge to transform an ordinary piece of silver into a $30 million masterpiece, not because it was intended to be valuable, but because history chose it to be, and that is why the 1891 one-dime USA coin continues to command awe, debate, and reverence among collectors and historians around the world, standing not just as a symbol of immense wealth, but as a timeless reminder that the smallest artifacts can carry the greatest stories.